Yo, what's going on, everybody? Doing some batch content right now, okay? Doing a little bit of batch content because why not? Already got the camera going. Okay, so last time we were talking about Erickson, okay? Psychologist, wonderful, okay? He pioneered the stages of life, okay? The psychosocial stages of life. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, okay? Character introductions. Now, I just did that. I feel like I'm on a loop, but, whatever. Going to plug in some books right here, okay? These are my books. The Yamikage. Oh, my goodness. A New Dawn, my first book. Bright, Dreadful Sun, awesome. Kind of like my experience about having epilepsy, which is a little crazy. Not Every Star in the Night. Oh, my goodness. Some sci-fi in here. So, yeah, the plug is over. Drop the link, subscribe, blah-de-da-de-da. I'm here to help you today, and hopefully I can do that. All right, so with that being said, let's talk about what we want to talk about. Characters. We want to talk about characters. But what kind of characters do we talk about? Fictitious, or we talk about real? We're talking about both. Okay, so with that being said, intimacy versus isolation. Okay, I feel like I need like a pipe or something like this. Intimacy versus isolation. Yeah, I'm looking here, but the camera's there. Why am I doing that? I don't know. So I could see what's going on. What is this? Frozen? Did I just freeze? I lagged. I'm frozen. Anyway, so what are we're gonna talk about here? So intimacy versus isolation is a psychosocial stage of life that follows. I'm not. This is off the dome, by the way. I assure you, I'm not on Google or anything. It's what follows the identity crisis, the role identity versus ego identity versus role confusion, which is kind of like the teenage years. Now we're moving on to kind of more the adult years, where the challenge of this stage of life is finding intimacy, love, beautiful, wonderful, versus isolation, like me, that stays inside and writes all day. So what does that mean for you? What does that mean for me? What does that mean for your characters? So with that being said, plugged deep into the subconscious programming of our brain, we want to mate. Okay, we want to get out there. We want to do the damn thing and further the human race. Okay. So how does this come out within the ego? Okay, that's something we can't avoid. That's just something that's plugged in here. But how can we use that in the ego here? If you're writing fiction, or even if you're writing anything, if you have human characters or human-like characters, they're going to have human psychology or human-like psychology, which is where I specialize in psychology, major license, yada yada yada. So with that being said, here's the thing about intimacy versus isolation. When you're writing it, especially when you're writing fiction, you really want to bring in these concepts of either, and they're almost all, it's just natural at this point because, this is embedded. You want to bring in that intimacy, that desire to be loved, that desire to be like, with somebody or without. And yes, it can be literal, but can it also not be literal? Of course it cannot be literal. Can also not be literal because finding intimacy could also come through, your career, helping society. And actually it kind of moves into the next stage, which is like full-on adulthood. This is more like young adult getting into that adulthood. So like I said in the last video, Erickson, I'm going to call them pillars. Okay, I'm going to call them pillars, but that's not what he calls them. So every stage of life, it's got like its pros, its cons. And, if you really don't nail it, this is a little bit where it does get a little more cookie cutter, is if you don't nail these certain concepts, the challenges of each stage of life, the next one is going to be a little bit more harder, or it could be a little bit, it's a stumble. It's really, at the end of the day, it's kind of more of a stumble. So with that being said, yeah, so your characters, especially in adulthood, maybe a little bit of young adulthood, they're finding intimacy. So this, like I said, comes out naturally. They start finding their partners. It's usually inside the book. They're finding intimacy in certain ways or another, or else what happens? They become isolated. And when you become isolated naturally, you can't avoid this. This is just literally in there. You can't avoid it. When you're isolated, you feel like low self-esteem. You feel like this is where a lot of characters, especially in writing, can get pretty bitter. Like you notice that like a lot of the characters that, here's a good example. I use Star Wars a lot, even though Star Wars is not a written book. I mean, there's a bunch of written novels that involved with it. But like, let's say Darth Vader. Darth Vader, it was a classic story because he was fighting for that intimacy versus isolation. So what happened? He failed at that stage because he screwed up. You know what I mean? So with that being said, yeah, the intimacy died and he ended up alone. So what is he doing in that next stage of life? So it's stagnation versus generativity is that next stage. So you see Darth Vader, he put all his whole life, his whole effort into building the empire. And that's what happens when isolation takes hold and intimacy kind of collapse. That's a perfect example. So if you're, let's say, writing an antagonist, maybe they have that absence of love, and that's, like I said, a lot of this is intuitive. But when you have that absence and, just kind of like with Freud a little bit too in the early childhood, a lot of it does have to do with the early childhood. The people that helped you in the previous stages. You know, if you had good role models, you have good idea, good ego identity. If not, you have role confusion or you don't know. So with that being said, there's so many different things that could happen. So and you'll see the main character is almost always intimate, almost always intimate. And now, like I said before, does it mean they're kissing everybody they see? No. No, that means they got a good bunch of friends. They love each other. They're fighting for a, like a kind of like a unique goal. That's where they find their intimacy. That's where this is kind of emerging. And you need that outlet, especially if you're my age or you're somebody else or you're in the same age group. You need to let that out and find some way. So if you're not, like, let's say you're not with the partner, maybe you want one or maybe you don't. Does that mean you can't be intimate? No, absolutely not. You can still be intimate by lashing on, maybe not lash, I don't want to use lash, but attaching yourself or anchoring yourself to a goal. And a lot of times you'll see isolated protagonists that are like kind of built towards that goal. I don't know. This kind of just popped in my head a little bit. I don't really know why. And it's not novel, but it's in Dragon Ball Z, there's a character called Piccolo, right? He's like an alien, crazy little dude. Well, he's not a little dude. He's actually super powerful, probably beat my butt. Anyways, my point is he's a character that he finds his intimacy with fighting with his friends. So instead of like his friends are all married, they have kids and all that, yada, yada. He does not, but he still finds intimacy by helping his best friends. You know what I mean? So with that being said, if you have a character in that kind of age group, I think he's a little older than that. I think he's in the sense that he's like an alien that's like hundreds of years old, maybe, or something like that. But he's a human-like character. And notice that even though he's not a human, he's utilizing human psychology. Is it a little different? This is pretty fun too, because when you have human-like characters, you can kind of step around these a little bit and have some fun with it. But yeah, human-like characteristics, they're going to bother. It's not should I embody that? No, it's literally it's gonna be there. You can't avoid this. We cannot avoid this. This is programmed into our very DNA. You know what I mean? But it's up to the ego to decide. Like, should I pursue this? Is this what I want to do? Usually when it's intimacy versus isolation and confusion, like leaning towards isolation, you can become very depressed. You can become very sultry. You know what I mean? You can become like very just like odd. I'm going to try to keep this video to 10 minutes like the other one. Maybe not odd, because now I'm looking at myself like, what? No, I'm going to say you can become like very depressed. You can become very reclusive. You know what I mean? Like that's and is that bad? Okay, it can be mostly bad. I guess I would say that. But at the same time, you could find solitude because you can also be too intimate. You could be too lashed to somebody, and that could also cause problems. It's all about balance with the stages of life. But basically, it's either good or bad. And the challenge lies between these two. Like, I guess this is the pillar. Your main character is like ping pong. You go in between the two. With that being said, we run with that. That's the challenge we all have. So writing a character with intimacy is like kind of the proper way to construct a human character at this stage of development, which is young adulthood into solidified adulthood, I suppose I would say. I think it's getting up to the 40s, I believe, or early. I think it's like 35 or 40 or something like that. It's like it's after the frontal cortex is established, which is at 25. No, it's not after. It's like in the midst of it. So I guess the intimacy versus isolation, I believe, starts at like around 21, maybe 20. I don't know. Like I said, I'm not on Google here, but it's young adulthood, quintessentially. So with that being said, get your characters intimate, okay? It doesn't have to be la-di-da-di, okay? Well, if you're writing a romance novel, yeah, go ahead and make them lovey-dovey intimate. But then also at the same time, that tension is going to come from isolation. This is like a lot of times people write romance with no tension. And that's incorrect in my opinion. I suppose there's no rhyme or reason to art, but there also is, in my opinion. So the antagonist in a romance novel that has no human antagonist, it's isolation. It's the concept of isolation. So you see this in a lot of rom-coms, you know what I mean? Like what the knockdown is not from an epic battle, you know what I mean? It's not from the kingdom being destroyed. It's from being isolated and kind of going like, am I ever going to find someone? What's going to happen to me? Oh no, now I got to wait to find somebody new. With that being said, no. I mean, yeah, go ahead. I mean, that's the antagonist of a romance novel often. If it's not like maybe like a cheater or a wife, what was a homewrecker husband dude, that could be an antagonist as well. But it's isolation. Even in that mix, it's isolation. And these are all our antagonists everybody in life has to fight against the social stages of life, the psychosocial stages of life, because in each and every stage of our life, there's that primary challenge. We can't avoid it. We cannot. We could try to avoid it. It's best to know about it. So, with that being said, I'm trying to be intimate with y'all. So yeah, I'm trying to just give you my piece of advice, what I've learned. Go ahead and follow it if you want. Like I said, human psychology is going to apply to human behaviors, and it's good because once you make the strive to learn psychology, to understand a little bit more of yourself, you can write characters that start to make a little bit more sense. Because you can tell sometimes when an author just doesn't understand the stages of life, and then it's like, like maybe a 90-year-old man is trying to find his identity, or maybe like a child is trying to find role confusion, and maybe a young adult is all hitting up stagnation. You want to have somewhat of a definitive, and if you don't understand or don't understand yourself, like I think it's Socrates that said, "Human, know thyself, and then you could create." Yeah, so good luck. Keep on writing. Don't stop writing. Get that 500 words and get those 1,000 words, and like, subscribe. We love it. Have a good day. And with that being said, don't be afraid to be intimate with your goals, with people, with your lover. And if you're isolated, don't be afraid of positive solitude, okay? Because that eventually turns into like kind of like an inner alchemy, which you kind of go, okay, I'm going to find myself a goal I can latch onto. And then that moves you into the next stage, which is going to come in the next video. Stagnation versus generativity. Oh, generativity.